Hey there, it's Dan from the Salty Sea, and today I'm going to run down the Slaanesh faction in Warcry. I'm going to start with some faction background and general playstyle, then go over the units, leaders, and abilities, before finishing with a list discussion. Slaanesh is the chaos god of excess, alternatively called the Dark Prince or She Who Thirsts. Slaanesh is a being of mysterious nature, but one who's always driven towards utter hedonism. Followers are always seeking a new luxury or maniacally obsessing over the perfection of an old skill. Any emotion taken to extremes fuels Slaanesh. There are some lore video creators who can give you excellent recaps of Slaanesh's story in Warhammer AOS, but the quick skinny is that Slaanesh is currently locked up in elf jail, being poked in the belly to make him vomit up all the elf souls that he snacked in the apocalypse that ended Warhammer Fantasy. But just because she's in jail doesn't mean her power is gone from the mortal realms, and Slaanesh's demons still wander the world, tempting people into acts of depravity and obsession. So does that lore make it into the playstyle? Well, yes and no. There's nothing particularly excessive, luxurious, or sensual about how Slaanesh plays in Warcry, but I don't know how you'd get those things into a game anyway, and the rules do all come together to create a cohesive faction that plays with a real personality. Slaanesh is a rushing wave of claws and pincers, with each unit and ability doing its part to create a kind of mobility supremacy on the field. To dig into it a little further, speed. Your spammable infantry is move 5. You have a bunch of move 10 options if you want them, and even your tanks are move 8. Your universal double is a much better version of rush, and your fiends even have an ability to lock down the movement of faster opponents. Slaanesh units also line up really well against high armored opponents, since their damage is so heavily weighted towards rolling a bunch of dice and fishing for crits. All those dice really communicate the idea of fast claws snipping and snapping until they find the perfect cut. Then you have Daemonettes. Can one unit count as a strength for a whole warband? I think this one can. There's some fun synergies too with the base sizes, where your defensive units have big bases and your Daemonettes, your only true offensive unit in the warband, have teensy little 25mm bases. So in a game with lots of terrain, you can sometimes place a fiend to block a route from your opponents, while your scissor-fisted murder ladies can still squeeze through. Now down to some cons. For one thing, the movement supremacy doesn't work as well against the flying warbands. There can also be a frustrating lack of synergy between your mounted units and the abilities they use. They're already a little less cost-effective in their roles than Daemonettes and Fiends are, so the synergy gap exacerbates the issue. The flip side of the swingy profile that doesn't degrade against heavy armor is that Toughness 4 units actually line up pretty well against Slaanesh, and a lot of this game is Toughness 4. T4 takes the same damage from Slaanesh as T5 does, but without paying a points premium on their unit profiles. Slaanesh is a pair of scissors when a lot of the format likes to throw rock. This drawback eases up in competitive play, where you'll see a little bit more Toughness 3 chaff units and Toughness 5 super elites. Finally, your elite units don't pack the same punch as the elite units in other warbands. Your Daemonettes mostly make up for it, but there are times where one bruiser can get a job done that a lot of little units can't. So let's get to the unit rundowns. I'm going to reference damage, efficiency, and tank score a little bit, so I just wanted to put the math here in case anyone wanted to talk about it in the comments. The main thing is I'm just looking for a single-digit score that lets you, at a glance, check out how well a unit does something for its points. Daemonettes. Daemonettes are angry demon ladies with crab claws where their hands should be. Nobody knows how they eat, but they're going to form the backbone of most Slaanesh warbands. They have good mobility for chaff and a very high damage output. In fact, one Daemonette does just as much or more damage than all of the more expensive units in this warband. Only your leader models hit harder, and even then the Daemonettes do more point for point. They have an odd crit fishing profile that can be quite swingy. Sometimes they'll blow an opposing elite unit off the table in one round of combat, and sometimes they'll completely whiff and lose a fight to opposing chaff. Your double, Sadistic Killers, helps mitigate a lot of this. But if you play with Slaanesh, you'll learn to live with riding the wave. Daemonettes take a game that's already about rolling sixes and push it to the extreme, which I guess is pretty thematic. Don't get discouraged by a couple bad rolls. The damage output from these ladies is going to average out well above the curve, and winning with Slaanesh will often come down to using your big units to lock down high-value targets, so your Daemonettes can swarm and tear them apart. Seekers. Still, Movement 5 is a lot less than Movement 10, so some Daemonettes go out and tame giant purple anteater snake hybrids with legs. The mounted Daemonette deals the same damage as a normal one, but at a much higher points cost. They make up for this with Movement 10 for grabbing objectives, and double the HP, which at Toughness 3 means they're still only average tankiness for their points. It all means that they can win the race to an objective, but will often lose the fight once they get there. They don't have big enough bases to zone opponents out of objective scoring range, and the mounted keyword can be a serious mobility drawback in terrain-heavy games. The Daemonette damage buff Sadistic Killers does work for Seekers, but Seekers will usually only get half the benefit from it. Seekers want to use their incredible threat range to move onto an opponent and attack in the same activation, or for finishing off a wounded opponent and then moving on. If they get stuck double attacking, all that amazing movement speed goes to waste. But Sadistic Killers benefits both attack actions and an activation, and the benefit amount is costed as such. Seekers have to either play against their strengths or only get half the benefit from their own special ability. Which is a shame, because Slaanesh doesn't use Onslaught very well either, leaving this offensive unit without a tailored offensive ability. For most armies, Onslaught is a 33% damage buff at the cost of 2 dice, but for Slaanesh it's only 25. Sadistic Killers is still better for this unit than Onslaught is, but it's worded to help troops that want to get stuck into long drawn-out combats, and Seekers are just more interested in hit and run. Your other mounted unit are Hellstriders. Some carry whips, and some have freaky blessings of Slaanesh in the form of spears for hands. Both have a decent 7.1 tank score and great 10-inch movement, meaning if you like the models, you can use them as objective grabbers or as forechecking defensive units, and they'll fly across the table without getting killed too quickly. The whips can fill the role of harassment unit, since they do more damage and at 3-inch range can actually knock units off some terrain while standing on the ground themselves. The spears still get range too, but also get the privilege of using the Impaling Strike ability for a triple, which does damage equal to the dice roll when you finish a move 1 inch away from a target. So why don't I like them? Well, the pieces don't fit together very well for the spears. Range 2 is nice, but it isn't very effective on a defensive unit. If you attack an opponent from 2 inches away, they have to waste an activation getting in range to attack you back. So range 2 protects fragile units from retaliation. But Hellstriders aren't fragile. So what? You don't get the max benefit, but what's the problem? Isn't it just bonus flexibility? Well, no, because attacking from range does have a cost. Units don't need to waste an activation disengaging if they don't feel like fighting you. If you attack at 2 inches, you need to be enough of a threat that your opponent can't ignore you. Otherwise, they'll just leave to go worry about whatever objective they need to win the game. And while neither Hellstrider hits very hard, the Spearmen have an even worse wet noodle problem. Worse, their charge ability only procs if you finish a move 1 inch away from the enemy, which puts all their long range to waste. In the end, they don't quite fit the mobile fortress role of Khorne's Blood Crusher, while simultaneously failing at the flanking threat role the Morsar Guard fills for the Ideneth. Can you just ignore that little 2 on their card and use them as charging anvils anyway? Absolutely. And if you do decide to go that route, use the whippy ones. Their extra damage and range give you so much more utility than the triple that you'd want to spend on your leader anyway. Don't worry, if you have a unit of spearmen, I'll give you a reason to turn your frown upside down in the leader section, but the basic spear cav are totally outclassed in their role by the next unit that I'm going to discuss. Fiends. With a 7.8 tank score, they're the most durable unit in the warband, and while their move 8 is a little less than the mounted troops, they make up for this by being able to climb onto terrain, so they play objectives well. They're perfect for holding treasure or taking a blood mark, because they can play keep away from slow units and also survive multiple rounds of attacks from whatever does actually manage to catch them. That doesn't mean they're purely defensive units. Fiends don't have an excellent damage profile. They do the same damage as Daemonettes while costing twice as much, but their base sizes and their double crushing grip make them excellent disruptive units on offense. Crushing grip holds a unit in place for the end of the round, so you can force your opponent's best unit to waste time fighting a 30 hit point fiend. Or you can hold down a high-value target so your Daemonettes can swarm up and cut it to pieces. The big bases synergize with the tiny Daemonette bases to occasionally create roadblocks that your troops can get through but your opponents can't. I don't believe in auto-includes. Play what you like in casual play and always question the conventional wisdom in competitive. But I promise that if you take at least one of your hammer, dagger, or shield, be a fiend and 2 Daemonettes, you'll be impressed at how they perform together. So let's talk about your leader options. The funny thing about Slaanesh leaders is they all do roughly the same damage, but they come at a range of point costs and all have different utility. So apologies if I upset anybody by being down on the Hellstriders, but don't worry, the big Hellstrider leader, aka the Hellreaver, is pretty good. Remember when I said range 2 only helps if your damage is a threat? While the Hellreaver might not be the best damage per point of your leader options, at 5 1/3 damage per attack against T4 models, his profile is plenty scary to force your opponent to make inefficient attacks into the range 2. And at 10 movement, he can also make sure he chooses his fights. He's great as an objective grabber, and will often be the fastest unit in your list. All of this makes the Hellreaver a great choice as an elite harasser that rewards tactical play. At only 5 wounds more than the base Fiend, the Blissbringer loses the point-for-point tankiness of the normal Fiend of Slaanesh. That said, rolling 5 dice instead of 4, it makes better use of your quad ability, turning it from disappointing to a legitimate alternative to the base quad Rampage. It does the same damage as cheaper demonic leader options, but I suppose being more survivable means you're more likely to find a place to use the leader triples. I've run this in games and enjoyed it, but I think the Hellreaver and the Heartseeker are both better options. So to go on to the Heartseeker, it's the leader version of a Seeker, and it's your cheapest option for a mobile hammer unit. Her excellent damage versus toughness 3 means she can move 10 inches onto a chaff unit and use the double sadistic killers to simply wipe it off the board, which is good for treasure missions. She doesn't have the flanking ability of the Hellreaver, but at 205 can be a flexible choice for list building. The Allurus is the Daemonette leader, and she's a great option if you're trying to fit as many units as possible into the army. At 7.5, her damage efficiency is excellent for a leader, but she's pretty fragile, so be careful how you commit her on the board. I tend to prefer using my leader slot on a unit that can choose its fights, but the Allurus is still a worthwhile option if you want to flood the board with Daemonettes, or if your mobile hammer role is taken up by another unit. As often as possible in the ability section, I want to talk about abilities as things to build your warband around. But Slaanesh abilities function more like nice utility for the units you want to run anyway. All 3 doubles are very useful to your best units, and your weakest units by cost efficiency don't have good abilities to catch up. So rather than reiterate the complaints you heard in the unit section, I'll just keep it brief, and say that Sadistic Killers is a 40% damage buff for Daemonettes, which is amazing. Onslaught is the universal double that every warband's double damage buff should be compared to, and it pumps Daemonette damage by 25%, so huge bonus here. Crushing Grip is for Fiends, and it won't be useful in every game, but when it is, it's almost always the difference between winning and losing, so keep it in the back of your mind at all times, and consider always playing at least one Fiend in your warband. Locus of Excruciation is a small damage buff against Toughness 4 enemies, which is nice because T4 is otherwise a soft counter to the demon half of this warband. In games versus T4, you can combo this with a double to unleash a hellstorm of damage in melee, but in half your games it just won't do anything, which along with the bad Hellreaver ability means this warband struggles to use triples. I find myself using wild dice to avoid triples with this warband, either turning them into quads or going for multiple doubles. The quad is fine and pretty good if you're using a Blissbringer, but otherwise it's almost always going to be less impactful than Rampage, the universal quad, so no reason to do a deep dive here. So that brings us to some lists. I call this one on the left the Wrath and Rapture box set list, because as of recording, that set is the easiest way to collect this warband. And this one takes a little bit of everything from the box. While it's a little low on Daemonettes for truly competitive play, you can still put one in every deployment zone if you want, and the movement from the 3 mounted units puts you in a great place for objective missions. Taking at least 2 of every type of demon is thematic, and I think a great way to start a campaign. That said, for competitive play, I think you'll do better with a focus list that leaves just the units that are best at defense and the units that are best at offense. I'll do a list building video in the future, but this game creates some incentives to have 3 durable elite units combined with as many cheap troops as you can fit. This list achieves that, while opening up plenty of room for tactical play with your tricksy Fiends and Hellreaver. You can replace a Fiend for 2 Daemonettes, but going down to 1 Fiend will compromise your disruption and board control. There's also an argument for replacing the Hellreaver with a Blissbringer here, which is less points efficient, but lets you make actual use of your quad. Test it out and let me know what you think. This next one is the ultimate speed list. Now I know I said some bad things about the mounted troops, but if you love painting those serpentine steeds, you can still get them to do some work in this game. If you play a treasure mission and one of your Hellstriders grabs the gold, your opponent's not getting it back. They can even use those long whips to get attacks in over the head of the Fiend you have body blocking for them. The Heartseeker does just as much damage as your 2 bigger leaders, while leaving enough points available to fit your entire range of troops into one list. Finally, I put a sweet Mind Stealer list in here. I just think the aesthetics of that model fit perfectly in a Slaanesh force, and I can't wait to paint one up and try it. It comes with a triple ability that makes up for our weak triples, and the damage profile helps alleviate the Slaanesh problem with a lack of elite hammers. This is the only list here that I haven't played myself, but I still think it's worth a try. So there you have it, Slaanesh in a nutshell. Let me know what you think in the comments. Have you tried them out? How'd it go? Let me know also if you have any ideas for what warband you'd like to see me do a video of next. I've got access to a few of them, though not all, so I'd love to check it out. Finally, until the next video, may all your rolls be crits.